The Revenge of the Wizard's Ghost by John Bellairs, Chapter 12. When Fergie woke up, he was lying on the grass outside the little grove of trees. The professor was kneeling over him and sponging his face with a wet handkerchief. "What? How?" mumbled Fergie as he struggled to sit up. "Where'd you... "Good evening," said the professor dryly. "So, you have decided to stay alive. Good. Would you mind telling me what you were doing near that filthy, accursed temple? You were supposed to wait for me by the church." Fergie was fully awake now, and he was getting angry. "Me?" he exclaimed. "I was supposed to wait for you? I came running over here because I heard you yelling for me. And I don't mind telling you, I wondered what you were doing here instead of being out at the car getting your wonderful, stupendous, precious flashlight." "I did go to get the flashlight," said the professor quietly. "But when I tried to get back through the gatehouse, the door was locked. I hammered and kicked at it, but I couldn't get in. So I had to start the car and bring it over and park it next to the wall, so I could use it to climb up. I made it over the wall, but by the time I got back to the church, you were gone." The professor sighed. "You know, my friend," he went on, "it was a very lucky thing for you that I found the holy water bottle lying on the bench. And it was also very lucky that I came over here to search for you. I thought that you might have come here to bury that dead dog. Well, when I arrived at the temple and saw that the door was open, I became very worried. And then I heard a sound of scuffling that seemed to be coming from inside. I rushed into the temple with the holy water bottle in my hand, and I saw you struggling with that evil hooded thing. I was scared out of my mind, but I had the holy water, and that did the trick. A few drops, and our hooded friend shriveled up and vanished." Fergie clutched himself and shuddered convulsively. Then he wiped his arm across his face. "What was it, Professor?" he asked. "What was that thing with the tentacles?" The professor glanced at the handkerchief that he had been using to wipe Fergie's face. It had a bad smell, so he flung it away. "It was a familiar," he said. "Old Zebulon Windrow was a wizard, and he had the power to conjure up familiar spirits, demons from the hellish pit. Sometimes those familiars take the shape of cats or other small animals, and sometimes they take the shapes of monsters. That thing that attacked you was like somebody's bad dream, but it had the power to kill." Fergie thought a bit, then he shook his head and smiled ruefully. "I promise you one thing, Prof," he said. "I won't ever kid you about your holy water again. I thought I was going to end up like, he shuddered again. "Like the dog?" said the professor grimly. "You might have. That was certainly what somebody wanted. It was no accident that the gatehouse door was locked. Some evil intelligence is at work here, and it wanted to split us up. Are you ready to go back to the church with me?" Fergie nodded emphatically. "I sure am. What do we do next?" The professor grinned and helped Fergie to his feet. They walked back slowly, and soon they were standing by the stone porch on the south side of the church. Moonlight shone down on the bench where Fergie had been sitting not so long ago, and next to the bench was the leather valise with their tools in it. The professor handed the searchlight to Fergie. Picking up the tool bag, he clicked on his own flashlight and shone the beam into the shadows under the porch. "If infernal powers have not sealed up this door," he said, "we will go and have ourselves a look inside Zeb's church. Are you coming?" Fergie nodded. In silence, they stepped in under the elaborately carved arch. Holding his breath, the professor twisted the iron ring, and the door opened. Into the church they went, and once again the cavernous dark space opened around them. Fergie could see the vague shapes of arches and a glimmer of moonlight in one of the far distant windows. "Impressive, eh?" whispered the professor. "I wish we had time to just wander around, but I'm afraid we have to stick to our business. Would you lend me your searchlight? It's a lot stronger than my little flashlight, and I need it to peer at the nooks and crannies high up on the wall. Byron, why are you glaring at me that way?" Fergie was furious. He had almost gotten killed when the professor went back to get his precious flashlight, and now he was saying he couldn't use it. But Fergie swallowed his anger. He gave the professor the big red lamp and took the small flashlight from him. They padded slowly down the aisle, and the long beam of the searchlight crept along the wall. Up, down it moved, and it poked into the dark hollows under arches. As he went, the professor began to whistle softly. It was a weird sound to hear. in this empty church at night. Fergie said nothing. He moved the beam of his flashlight over the pavement, hoping that he would find the lily-covered shield before the professor did. But he didn't find anything, and neither did the professor. Suddenly, with a loud, crabby exclamation, the professor stopped. "Of course! How could I have been so dense? Ensign French is the boss! Of course! What an idiot I have been!" Fergie did not have the faintest idea of what the professor was talking about, and it sounded like he had figured out something, but it was hard to tell what. "Huh?" he said. "What's up?" The professor cackled. Well, you may ask what's up. Have a look for yourself." As Fergie watched, the beam of the searchlight climbed the stone wall and moved out across the ceiling overhead. It was a carved arched stone ceiling, and directly above the place where they were standing was a stone disc with 4 raised ribs running away from it. Like this. And there's a picture of it in the book. "You see that disc up there? You see that disc up there?" said the professor. "Well, it's called a boss. In Gothic churches, those bosses are often carved into fantastic, grotesque shapes, and sometimes they have shields on them. And that, my fine friend, is what we've got to look for. Follow me." The professor took the binoculars out of his tool bag and hung the strap around his neck. Then he started to move slowly along, whistling softly. Fergie followed the professor, who was now playing the searchlight beam straight up over the ribbed ceiling. They walked down the side aisle of the church, and then turned right and moved along the nave, which is the main body of the church. Fergie got to see lots of bosses, and they all seemed to have decorations, but the bosses were so far away that it was hard to tell what the decorations were supposed to be. Every so often, the professor would stop and ask Fergie to hold the light steady. Then, with the aid of the binoculars, he would peer and squint a bit, and grumble and move on. As they crept along, Fergie found that he was getting more and more nervous. This vast old building was really giving him the creeps, even more than it had the first time he was in it. He kept imagining that he heard tiny sounds like footsteps or mumbled coughing. But each time he stopped and strained to listen, he heard nothing. "Professor, I hope we can find what we came for and get out of this place," he muttered. "I'm going to get the screaming woo-hoos, but good if we stay here much longer." "I'm not feeling terribly calm myself," muttered the professor as he maneuvered